the grand traditional Italian restaurant. Il Leone d'Oro, the Golden Lion, stood on a bustling corner in the heart of Little Italy, Manhattan, a beacon of old-world charm amidst the ceaseless thrum of New York City, its facade, adorned with intricate wrought iron and planters overflowing with vibrant red geraniums, hinted at the opulence within. Inside, heavy red velvet drapes cascaded from high windows. Antique brass chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over polished dark wood paneling, and crisp white linen tablecloths invited patrons to a feast. The air was a rich tapestry of scents, the inviting aroma of garlic sizzling gently, the deep, earthy perfume of simmering tomato sauce, the fresh, herbaceous whisper of basil, and the comforting warmth of baking bread. This intoxicating sensory experience was a carefully crafted illusion, a deceptive facade meticulously maintained to mask the true, illicit nature of the Rossi family's powerful influence. It was a place of boisterous laughter echoing from the main dining room, booming voices commanding attention, the constant clinking of glasses celebrating unspoken victories, and intimidating figures in expensive, perfectly tailored suits, their eyes sharp and watchful, all moving with purpose under the discerning gaze of the family patriarch. This restaurant served as both a public symbol of their respectability and a private hub for their more nefarious dealings, a gilded cage for the family's true business. Amidst this world of overt power and hidden menace moved Marco Rossi, the youngest son, a man in his late 20s who was remarkably, almost jarringly, different from his imposing family. He possessed an innate gentleness, a quiet demeanor, and a sensitive nature that was evident in his thoughtful, often distant eyes, and the way he navigated the crowded restaurant with a subtle, almost ethereal grace, as if trying not to disturb the very air, while his older brothers commanded respect with their booming voices and menacing glares. Marco sought refuge in the chaotic heart of the restaurant, the kitchen. Here, amidst the clatter of pots and pans, the hiss of steam, and the hurried shouts of chefs, he found his solace. He quietly, almost meditatively, created intricate, delicate desserts, towering tiramisus dusted with cocoa, delicate cannolis filled with rich ricotta cream, and impossibly light panna cottas adorned with fresh berries. His creations were a stark contrast to the hearty, robust, and often forcefully presented main courses that were the restaurant's staple, just as his nature contrasted with his family's. His hands, though capable of heavy lifting and managing the brute force required in a professional kitchen, were nimble and precise, like an artist's, capable of the most delicate garnishes. Beyond the kitchen, Marco retreated into an inner world rich with quiet passions. He was an avid reader, spending late nights immersed in classic literature, Dickens, Hemingway, even Russian novelists, finding solace and understanding in narratives far removed from his own reality. He was also a lover of classical music, which he often played softly on an old, slightly crackling record player in his small, sparsely furnished apartment situated directly above the restaurant. These quiet pursuits were his rebellion, his escape from the suffocating expectations of his family. Marco possessed a natural, almost empathic ability to de-escalate tensions, to read unspoken emotions from the subtlest shifts in body language, and to understand people's true motivations beneath their aggressive or defensive facades. He saw the fear behind the bluster, the insecurity beneath the bravado. This profound insight was a skill often mistaken for weakness, or simply ignored, by his family, who valued brute force, intimidation, and overt displays of power above all else. His gentle nature, his quiet intellectualism, and his aversion to violence made him the constant target of his father's open disapproval and his older brother's relentless mockery, particularly from Silvio. Marco often retreated deeper into himself, finding solace in his solitude and the quiet, structured creativity of baking. He felt like a dissonant note in a loud, violent symphony, always searching for harmony where only discord seemed to exist. One particularly sweltering summer evening, the air in Il Leone d'Oro was thick with unspoken tension. A high-stakes family dinner was underway, attended by a powerful, notoriously unpredictable client from outside their immediate circle, a feared enforcer from a rival crew, or perhaps a deeply corrupt city official whose patronage was vital to the Rossis' legitimate interests. The client, a man known for his explosive temper and short fuse, was already looking agitated, his eyes scanning the room with suspicion. A new, incredibly nervous waitress, barely out of high school, her hands trembling as she navigated the crowded tables, carried a tray laden with glasses of expensive Chianti. As she squeezed past a particularly boisterous table, her foot caught on a loose rug. In a terrifying slow motion, she tripped. The tray went flying, and a cascade of ruby-red wine drenched the powerful client's pristine, custom-tailored white linen suit, leaving a vibrant, staining Rorschach test across his chest. The client's face immediately contorted in a furious, crimson mask. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, and his hand twitched towards something hidden beneath his jacket. Before he could erupt in a torrent of curses, before the situation could escalate into a public scene that would damage the Rossis' reputation, and crucially, before Marco's hot-headed older brother, Silvio, could intervene with his usual aggressive threats or heavy-handed apologies that would only further inflame the situation. Marco acted. He moved with a speed that belied his quiet nature, yet with a calm that was almost supernatural. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even make eye contact with Silvio, whose face was already twisting into a furious scowl. Instead, Marco calmly, gently, yet firmly stepped forward, directly into the client's furious line of sight. He knelt slightly, maintaining a respectful eye level, his gaze steady and reassuring. His voice, a low, soothing balm, cut through the sudden silence of the dining room. "My deepest apologies, sir," he said, his tone genuinely regretful, devoid of any subservience or fear. "An unfortunate accident with an exceptionally robust Chianti. I'm afraid. It has a habit of demanding attention." He immediately, without drawing undue attention, placed a fresh, perfectly chilled glass of the same expensive Chianti directly into the client's hand, as if offering a silent peace treaty. With a few quiet, empathetic words about the unpredictable nature of fine wine, and a subtle, knowing smile that acknowledged the client's frustration without patronizing him, Marco diffused the situation completely. He gestured subtly to another waiter to bring a clean towel, then quietly informed the client that the suit would be professionally cleaned at the family's expense. A gesture that spoke volumes about their commitment to customer satisfaction. The client, disarmed by Marco's unexpected calm, his genuine humility, and his efficient, non-aggressive solution, found himself unable to sustain his anger. The red receded from his face. He merely grumbled, then accepted the offer, even managing a grudging nod of appreciation before returning to his meal. His anger dissipated as quickly as it had flared. The nervous waitress, trembling with relief, gave Marco a look of profound, silent gratitude. This subtle yet powerfully effective intervention, witnessed by no one but the terrified waitress, the client, and a simmering Silvio, showcased Marco's unique strength, his ability to connect, to soothe, and to resolve conflict without resorting to aggression, threats, or overt displays of power. He had used empathy and quick thinking to avoid a potential disaster, a stark contrast to his family's brutal methods. The client left later that evening with a surprisingly pleasant demeanor, completely oblivious to the deeper tensions and the internal family dynamics he had just witnessed, and unknowingly had become a testament to Marco's unconventional power. At the head of the Rossi family, casting a long, intimidating shadow over every aspect of their lives, was Don Vincenzo Rossi, a man in his late 60s, whose very presence seemed to fill and dominate any room he entered. He was the family patriarch, a powerful old-school mob boss, a formidable figure whose name alone commanded respect and fear throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. His face, etched with decades of ruthless decision-making, was carved from granite, and his eyes, sharp and unblinking, seemed to miss nothing. He ruled his vast family business, an intricate web of protection rackets, gambling operations, legitimate businesses like Il Leon d'Oro serving as fronts, and a formidable network of loyal enforcers with an iron fist. His philosophy was simple, and brutal power was gained and maintained through intimidation, unwavering loyalty, and, when absolutely necessary, swift and merciless violence. He sat at the head of every family dinner, an undisputed king, his every pronouncement law. Don Vincenzo openly, frequently, and vehemently mocked Marco's gentleness, his quiet nature, and his seemingly soft preference for the artistic precision of desserts over the brutal realities of real business. He viewed Marco's traits as a grave weakness, a personal and public stain on the formidable Rossi name, a deviation from the lineage of lions he believed himself to be part of. He frequently thundered, for all to hear, his voice echoing through the restaurant or the family's opulent living room. A lion does not purr. Marco. A lion roars. A Rossi takes what he wants. He doesn't ask politely. You are a Rossi. Boy. Not a kitten in a pastry shop. You need to grow claws. Boy fangs. This constant denigration, a public and private humiliation, firmly established Don Vincenzo as the primary antagonist type B, misunderstood, arrogant entity. His arrogance stemmed not from malice, but from an inflexible, deeply ingrained adherence to traditional violent methods of control. He possessed a profound, almost pathological fear that any deviation from brute strength was a sign of fatal weakness, and an utter inability to see strength in anything but overt, demonstrable power, standing proudly, often menacingly. Beside Don Vincenzo was Silvio Rossi, Marco's older brother, a hulking man in his mid-30s with a short fuse, a thick neck, and an eagerness to prove himself worthy of being the heir apparent. Silvio was the embodiment of the family's violent tendencies, a brutish enforcer who thrived on intimidation. He took particular pleasure in belittling Marco, seeing his younger brother as a soft, academic disappointment who should be out collecting debts, breaking kneecaps, or running protection rackets, not quietly perfecting delicate pastries. Look at him. Papa, Silvio would sneer, gesturing at Marco. He smells of sugar, not gunpowder. He wouldn't know a threat if it slapped him across the face. Their interactions, filled with Silvio's sneers, his thinly veiled threats to toughen Marco up, and his constant attempts to draw Marco into the violent side of the business, highlighted the suffocating pressure Marco faced. He was trapped in a world that demanded he be someone he fundamentally was not, constantly forced to conform to violent expectations he abhorred. The quiet storm of discontent within Marco's soul, however, was building, unnoticed by the very people who sought to break him. The crisp New York autumn had barely settled when the fragile, uneasy peace of the Rossi family's underworld empire was shattered by a brutal, unprovoked attack on Il Leone d'Oro. It wasn't the kind of incident that could be dismissed as common street crime or a petty dispute. This was a calculated, devastating act of war. It occurred late one Tuesday night, after the last lingering patrons had finally departed and the heavy oak doors had been secured. Marco, in his small apartment above, was unwinding with a worn copy of Dostoevsky and the quiet strains of a Bach cello suite. The sudden, deafening roar of an explosion ripped through the usually tranquil night, followed immediately by the shattering of glass and the terrifying crackling hiss of rapidly spreading flames. He rushed to his window. Below, the opulent facade of Il Leone d'Oro, once a symbol of the Rossi's power, was being consumed by a fiery inferno. Molotov cocktails, crudely fashioned but lethally effective, had been hurled through the ornate front windows, igniting the main dining room in a blaze of red and orange. The kitchen, Marco's personal sanctuary, his quiet refuge from the family's brutal realities, was not spared. A separate, targeted firebomb detonated near the pastry ovens, sending shards of glass and searing flames across his meticulously organized workspace, charring the cookbooks and melting his treasured baking tools. The smell of burning sugar mingled with the acrid stench of gasoline and scorched wood. Most tragically, Antonio "Tony" Moretti, not of the rival family, but a loyal, long-serving maitre d' at Il Leone d'Oro, a man beloved by staff and customers alike for his charming smile, impeccable service, and unwavering loyalty to Don Vincenzo, had stayed late to close up the register. He was caught in the initial explosion, his screams choked by smoke and flame. He was pulled from the wreckage by arriving firefighters, barely alive, and rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital in critical condition, his body terribly burned. The message delivered by this brutal act was chillingly clear and undeniable. This was a direct, personal assault, a declaration of war, designed to send a devastating, unmistakable message of dominance from the rival Moretti family, a ruthless crime organization from Brooklyn, notorious for their swift, brutal tactics and their burgeoning influence in city politics. The long-standing, simmering feud with the Rossis over control of the lucrative drug trade routes and gambling rackets across the boroughs had finally, catastrophically, exploded. Don Vincenzo Rossi was absolutely enraged. The attack on his restaurant, his carefully constructed symbol of power and legitimacy, and the grievous, life-threatening injury to Tony, a man he considered family, a loyal soldier for decades, was an unforgivable affront. His granite face hardened into a mask of cold, terrifying fury, his eyes blazing with a dangerous reptilian light that promised nothing less than overwhelming retribution. He immediately summoned his capos and enforcers to an emergency meeting in the smoke-filled, still smoldering back office of the charred restaurant, the flickering flames of the remaining embers casting dancing shadows on their grim faces. "Blood for blood," Vincenzo roared, his voice thick with a guttural rage that shook the very foundations of the ruined building. "They burn our home. They hurt our people. They will pay 1,000-fold. They will drown in their own blood." He dismissed any notion of negotiation or diplomacy as weakness, as a sign of cowardice in the face of such aggression. He saw this not just as a challenge to his authority, but as an existential threat to the Rossi family's standing in the underworld, an insult that demanded immediate and brutal response. He began mobilizing his men, pulling resources from every corner of their sprawling empire, arming them with an unprecedented array of weaponry, and planning precise, devastating counterattacks against every known Moretti interest, their legitimate businesses, their drug operations, their gambling dens, even targeting key Moretti personnel and their families. He drew up detailed plans, mapping out strategic strikes across Brooklyn. His plans threatened to plunge the entire city's underworld into a devastating, prolonged, and bloody conflict. An old-school gang war that could decimate both families, wipe out generations, and cause immense, unthinkable collateral damage across the city. The city held its breath, bracing for the storm. Marco surveyed the charred remains of the kitchen, his heart aching for the wanton destruction of his sanctuary, the lingering smell of burnt sugar a sickening reminder of lost beauty. But his anguish was far deeper for Tony, now fighting for his life in a hospital bed, and for the countless innocent lives that would inevitably be caught in the brutal crossfire of the looming, senseless war. He saw, with agonizing clarity, the endless futile cycle of vengeance that had consumed generations of his family. Each act of violence bred another, leaving nothing but ruin, grief, and a trail of shattered lives. He recalled fragmented, terrifying childhood memories of previous feuds, the sudden, deafening sound of gunshots on quiet streets, the image of ordinary people, a young mother pushing a stroller, an elderly man walking his dog, senselessly caught in gang crossfire, their lives extinguished in moments of brutal indifference. A profound, agonizing sense of responsibility settled over him. He felt an urgent need to protect his family, not through the traditional, brutal methods of violence and intimidation, but through the unique, unconventional strength of his gentleness, his empathy, and his ability to understand human nature beyond its aggressive exterior. He believed, with a burning, unshakable conviction, that there had to be another way, a path to de-escalation that his father, blinded by rage and tradition, could not or would not see. This conviction hardened into a desperate resolve. He approached his father in the aftermath of the attack, while the smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air, his uniform charred and his face streaked with soot. He chose his words carefully, tentatively, avoiding any tone of defiance. He suggested negotiation, proposing a discreet meeting with the Morettis, offering alternative solutions to bloodshed. He appealed to Vincenzo's pragmatic side, emphasizing the long-term, crippling financial cost of an all-out war on their legitimate businesses, the drain on their resources, the inevitable increase in law enforcement scrutiny, and the immense human cost to their people, their family, their loyal foot soldiers, their wives and children. He argued, calmly but passionately, that violence only bred more violence, creating an endless, unwinnable cycle, and that true, enduring strength lay not in how many enemies you defeated, but in how many conflicts you could prevent or resolve through intelligence and foresight. He even subtly hinted at the instability Don Moretti's failing health might be causing within their rivals' ranks, suggesting it could be an opportunity for a strategic, non-violent move. Vincenzo exploded in a furious, contemptuous tirade. He stood over Marco, his massive shadow enveloping his son, his face a grotesque mask of rage and disgust. Negotiation with rats who burn down our home and leave our men bleeding. Marco, he roared, his voice shaking the charred rafters of the makeshift office. You speak of peace when they declare war. You shame this family with such weakness. This is a fight, boy, and in a fight, you either hit first and hit hardest, or you die. There is no middle ground, no peace with dogs who bite the hand that feeds them. He openly mocked Marco's softness and naivety in front of his trusted capos and a sneering Silvio, who stood beside his father, a cruel grin of satisfaction twisting his lips. What's wrong, Marco? Silvio jeered. Afraid to get your hands dirty. Maybe you should stick to baking cookies. Huh, let real men handle the family business. This ain't no tea party, little brother. Boim. Marco was publicly humiliated, his sincere ideas dismissed as cowardly, unrossi, and utterly irrelevant in the brutal, black-and-white world his father and brother inhabited. The capos, though outwardly silent, shifted uncomfortably, sharing knowing glances that reinforced the ingrained belief that Marco was fundamentally unfit for the family's true business. A perpetual disappointment to the Don, despite the searing humiliation, despite the dismissive mockery that cut deeper than any physical blow. Marco was resolute. The searing vision of Tony in the hospital bed, the chilling memory of previous innocent victims, and the stark knowledge of the impending devastating war solidified his conviction. He could not, in good conscience, stand by and watch his family destroy itself and plunge the city into needless chaos. He knew with unshakable certainty that his father, blinded by ingrained rage and tradition, would never sanction peace through conventional means. Therefore, he had to act alone, outside the family's knowledge. That very night, under the deep cover of a moonless sky, he covertly began to seek an indirect, deniable channel to the Morettis. He started sifting through his quiet, unassuming network of contacts. The old Italian grocer, whose family had known both sides for generations. The discreet tailor who custom-fitted suits for powerful men from every borough. The librarian who knew secrets whispered between books. He used no threatening words, no forceful demands. Instead, he relied on subtle hints, shared anxieties about the escalating violence, and gentle inquiries, driven by a desperate, burning hope that his unique, gentle approach might be the only way to save them all. This act, going behind his father's back, directly defying the patriarch's explicit commands, was Marco's point of no return. He was now irrevocably committed to his dangerous path, risking everything, his relationship with his family, his precarious standing, his own life, to find peace, even if it meant directly opposing the very man who raised him and the only world he had ever known. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that this unconventional path, his innate gentleness, was not a weakness, but the only true strength he possessed, the only real chance for salvation. The pervasive scent of smoke, clinging stubbornly to the scorched remains of Il Leone d'Oro, was a constant, acrid reminder of the inferno that had engulfed Marco's sanctuary. But for Marco, it fueled a quiet, desperate resolve. His father, Don Vincenzo, blinded by fury and tradition, was preparing for an all-out war, a brutal retaliation that would only perpetuate the cycle of bloodshed that had defined their family for generations. Marco knew, with an agonizing certainty, that this path led only to ruin. His gentleness, once a source of mockery, now felt like his only weapon, his only hope. He had to find another way, a path to peace that his father, steeped in the old ways, could not comprehend. Operating in complete secrecy, a ghost moving through the bustling arteries of New York City, Marco began his covert outreach. He avoided the usual channels, the shadowy intermediaries that populated his family's underworld. Instead, he turned to the unassuming, often overlooked individuals who formed the true backbone of the city's communities. The quiet, elderly woman who ran the local bakery, her hands dusted with flour, but her ears always open. The unassuming restaurant supplier who moved between rival territories with an almost diplomatic neutrality. A retired Irish-American priest from the old neighborhood, Father Michael, known for his wisdom and his quiet efforts to keep the peace among various ethnic groups. Marco didn't use threats or leverage. He used genuine pleas for common ground, speaking not of territory or power, but of the innocent lives caught in the crossfire, the families destroyed, the businesses crippled by fear. He painted a vivid picture of a city bleeding from an endless, senseless conflict. His efforts, painstakingly slow and fraught with peril, eventually led him to an unexpected, yet crucially vital, connection. Isabella Moretti. She was the estranged daughter of Don Carlo Moretti, the rival mob boss. Isabella was a sharp, pragmatic lawyer in her early 30s, possessing a keen intellect and a cool, analytical demeanor. She had meticulously built a legitimate career for herself in a high-powered Manhattan law firm, successfully distancing herself, at least publicly, from her family's criminal dealings. Yet, despite her efforts to escape, she still harbored a deep, quiet concern for her family's future, for the younger cousins and nephews she saw being drawn into the same destructive cycle. She was tired of the endless bloodshed that had claimed too many lives on both sides, including distant relatives she barely knew, but whose funerals she had attended with a heavy heart. Isabella was initially deeply skeptical, even overtly hostile, when Marco's subtle feelers reached her. A Rossi seeking peace. It sounded like a trap, a desperate ploy from a losing side. Her first cautious meeting with Marco, arranged through the retired priest in the hushed, neutral confines of an old rectory, was riddled with suspicion. She sat across from him, her posture rigid, her dark eyes narrowed, expecting threats, bluster, or manipulation. Instead, Marco spoke softly, without a hint of aggression. He didn't mention territory or power. He spoke of the shared human cost, of the businesses on both sides struggling under the weight of fear and intimidation, of the toll on their aging parents, of the next generation doomed to repeat the same mistakes. His genuine sincerity, his quiet plea for peace, and his uncanny ability to articulate the shared tragedy of their family's feud, slowly, subtly, chipped away at her carefully constructed defenses. He spoke of his own pain, of Tony Moretti lying in a hospital bed, a man respected by both sides. He conveyed a palpable sense of weariness, a yearning for an end to the madness that transcended mere tactical advantage. Isabella, for the first time, saw something truly different in a Rossi. She saw surprising intellectual depth, emotional maturity, and a profound empathy qualities she had never encountered in the cutthroat world of the underworld. She realized his gentleness was not weakness, but a powerful, persuasive force, an unexpected leverage. He wasn't seeking surrender, he was seeking resolution. She saw a flicker of hope, a potential path she hadn't dared to imagine. This quiet understanding forged a tentative, secret alliance. Isabella Moretti, a pragmatist driven by a hidden desire for peace, became Marco's first, crucial helper. a bridge between two warring worlds. Their initial clandestine negotiation, the true unveiling of Marco's unique talent, took place a few days later. Isabella, still wary but intrigued, arranged a meeting in a seemingly innocuous, yet strategically chosen, neutral public location, the quiet, almost deserted sculpture garden of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, during off-peak hours. It was a place of serene beauty, far removed from the volatile territories of their families, a stark contrast to the violence that permeated their lives. Marco arrived alone, dressed simply, without any visible signs of his family's usual ostentation. He didn't attempt to intimidate or manipulate Isabella. There were no veiled threats, no boasting of Rossi's strength. Instead, he began by acknowledging the deep-seated animosity, the legitimate grievances on both sides. He then shifted the narrative, articulating with calm precision the long-term, devastating consequences of an all-out war for both families, the crippling financial drain, the constant threat of law enforcement intervention, the inevitable loss of more lives, the destruction of their legitimate fronts, and the very fabric of their communities unraveling under the fear. He appealed to their shared humanity, to the collateral damage that extended far beyond the immediate combatants. He spoke of the possibility of legitimate prosperity, of a future where their families could thrive without constant vigilance, without living under the shadow of violence. He didn't just propose a ceasefire, he proposed a structured, comprehensive negotiation process, a path to de-escalation that included territorial agreements, mutual non-aggression pacts, and even potential joint ventures in legitimate businesses, laying the groundwork for a new, stable dynamic. Isabella, a seasoned lawyer, was accustomed to parsing rhetoric and identifying hidden agendas. But Marco's words resonated with an undeniable truth, stripped of ego or aggression. She witnessed his unique talent firsthand, his uncanny ability to disarm hostility with empathy, to articulate complex ideas with quiet conviction, to find common ground in seemingly irreconcilable differences, and to articulate a vision of peace that transcended the brutal cycle of violence they were trapped in. He spoke not from a position of strength or weakness, but from a place of genuine, desperate reason. She saw that his gentleness wasn't just a personal trait, it was a powerful, persuasive force, a tool capable of reshaping alliances. He didn't just want peace, he wanted a fundamental, lasting change. She saw the light within him, a glimmer of genuine hope she hadn't known she was desperately seeking. She leaned forward, her initial rigid posture relaxing slightly. "You're not like your father, Marco Rossi," she stated, her voice low, a hint of grudging respect in her tone. "Or your brother. You truly believe this, don't you?" Marco simply met her gaze, his sincerity undeniable. Isabella agreed to tentatively explore a channel for negotiation with certain, discrete elements within her own family, specifically those tired of the constant war. But she warned him of the immense risks, the deep-seated resistance they would face from the traditionalists in both their organizations. "My father, he's a lion, just like yours," she cautioned. "And there are others in my family who thrive on this conflict." While Marco was building a fragile bridge of peace, his brother Silvio was unknowingly, yet inevitably, undermining him. Silvio, ever suspicious of Marco's softness and his unusual secrecy following the attack on Il Leone d'Oro, felt a primal, aggressive instinct to prove his own loyalty and perceive strength to his father. He had always resented Marco's quiet nature, viewing it as effeminate and cowardly, a stark contrast to his own brutish machismo. He noticed Marco's clandestine meetings, his frequent, hushed phone calls, his inexplicable disappearances at odd hours, fueled by his own aggressive ambition and a deep-seated need to be seen as Don Vincenzo's true successor. Silvio ordered a few of his most discreet, loyal men, seasoned enforcers known for their shadow work, to discreetly follow Marco. They tailed him for days, through the bustling streets of Little Italy, across to Manhattan, to obscure coffee shops and libraries. Their surveillance finally yielded results. Silvio's men managed to obtain undeniable photographic evidence clear. Damning images of Marco meeting repeatedly with Isabella Moretti in various neutral locations. The photos showed them deep in conversation, sometimes leaning in conspiratorially, sometimes sharing a subtle, almost intimate gesture of understanding. The very sight of his gentle brother consorting with the enemy, the daughter of their sworn rival, sent a surge of vengeful triumph through Silvio. He saw it not as negotiation, but as an unforgivable act of treason, a blatant betrayal of their family's code. Silvio wasted no time. He presented the damning evidence to Don Vincenzo late one sweltering summer night, twisting it to suggest the worst possible betrayal. He spread the photographs across the polished mahogany desk in the back office of the temporary Rossi headquarters, a heavily guarded, nondescript warehouse in the Bronx, repurposed after the restaurant attack. The air in the room was thick with cigar smoke, the scent of expensive liquor, and the palpable tension of impending war. Vincenzo, flanked by a seething Silvio and several of his most loyal, battle-hardened capos, men who had bled for the Rossi name, stared at the images, his face contorting into a mask of cold fury. "Explain this." "Marco," Vincenzo roared, slamming a photograph of his youngest son shaking hands with Isabella Moretti onto the desk. His voice, usually booming, was now a low, dangerous growl. "You consort with the Morettis, the rats who burned our home, the very family we are about to crush." He saw Marco's actions not as a desperate attempt at peace, but as an unforgivable act of insubordination, a profound betrayal that could shatter his authority and endanger the entire family. He believed Marco was either a fool, too soft to understand the brutal realities of their world, or worse, a traitor. Marco stood before his father, outwardly calm despite the crushing weight of their disapproval. He tried to explain, to articulate his vision of a peaceful resolution, to describe the true cost of the war. "Papa, this isn't betrayal. This is strategy. I'm trying to prevent a bloodbath that will destroy us all. They are vulnerable, too. There's a path to peace, to a new future." But Vincenzo cut him off, his face contorted in disgust. "Peace. There is no peace with rats. Marco, there is only victory or defeat. You speak of peace, but you sow weakness. You shame this family with your soft talk." Silvio smirked, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Vincenzo, his voice chillingly quiet now, delivered a chilling ultimatum. "Cease all contact with the Morettis immediately. Every communication, every meeting, every thought of peace. You sever all ties, or you will face consequences. Severe, unspecified consequences." His eyes bore into Marco's, conveying a silent, terrifying threat. He made it clear that Marco's life, and perhaps even Isabella's, was now in grave danger if he continued his treasonous dealings. This was the antagonist's direct action, a visceral demonstration of Vincenzo's fear of Marco's unconventional approach, his unwavering determination to maintain absolute control through intimidation and the old, violent ways, even if it meant sacrificing his own son. The gauntlet had been thrown. Marco stood alone, his gentle heart now a silent battlefield. The fragile threads of peace Marco had so painstakingly woven threatened to snap under the escalating pressure. The gang war, once a simmering feud, had ignited into a raging inferno, escalating beyond Don Vincenzo's control and spiraling into widespread chaos. The Morettis, enraged by the attack on their territory and fueled by a ruthless determination to assert dominance, retaliated with brutal, surgical efficiency. Their targets weren't just the Rossi family's illicit operations, they hit the legitimate businesses. 2. Warehouses distributing Rossi's finest olive oil were torched. Their trucks mysteriously vanished, and high-end construction projects secretly backed by Rossi money faced unforeseen delays due to crippling labor disputes and sudden, catastrophic equipment failures. Fear permeated the city's underworld, but more alarmingly, it began to seep into the everyday lives of ordinary citizens. Small businesses, suppliers, and even local politicians caught in the crossfire felt the chilling ripple effects of the escalating violence. The local media, a ravenous beast sniffing out scandal and bloodshed, reported heavily on the rising violence. Headlines screamed about mob war plagues city streets, authorities helpless as crime families battle, and businesses burn in underworld conflict. Public pressure mounted on law enforcement to contain the spiraling conflict, but the true architects of the violence remained untouchable, operating in the shadows. This pervasive fear and instability, now affecting the broader community, paradoxically increased the pressure on both families to either end the war or escalate it to a definitive, if devastating, conclusion. Meanwhile, Don Carlo Moretti, Isabella's father and the patriarch of the rival family, had been quietly grappling with his own mortality. He was gravely ill, his once formidable presence now a shadow of its former self, weakened by a relentless, unnamed disease. The escalation of violence, Isabella had revealed to Marco, was partly due to his ambitious, ruthless lieutenants, particularly a younger, hot-headed capo named Vinny the Blade Costanza. These men, sensing Don Moretti's imminent death, were ruthlessly trying to prove their loyalty and ruthlessness to the dying boss, aiming to secure their succession in the power vacuum they knew was coming. They believed that only through overwhelming displays of aggression could they solidify their claims to power. Don Carlo, despite his fading health, still held immense sway. He unexpectedly announced a public summit of all crime families in New York City, ostensibly to discuss the future of the city's underworld, the shifting landscape of power, and the need for order. But for those in the know, it was a thinly veiled challenge to Vincenzo, a public assertion of Moretti dominance, designed to corner the Rossi patriarch into a desperate, losing confrontation. Don Carlo, in his last act, sought to cement his legacy by crushing his oldest rival. Vincenzo, already enraged and cornered by the escalating attacks, saw this summit as the ultimate insult, a final public humiliation. He was not going to negotiate. He was preparing for an all-out bloodbath, viewing the summit as a trap designed to draw his forces out into the open. They want a war. They'll get a war. He bellowed to Silvio and his capos, his voice hoarse with fury. He told Marco, in no uncertain terms, that any further attempts at peace would be seen as an outright act of betrayal, punishable by the highest laws of their family. Amidst this terrifying escalation, Isabella, increasingly desperate as her own family suffered devastating losses in the relentless skirmishes, covertly reached out to Marco. She managed to slip away from her family's watchful eyes for a brief, urgent phone call from a payphone in a deserted subway station. Her voice was strained, barely a whisper. She confirmed the full extent of her father's illness and the volatile internal power struggle among his lieutenants. They're fighting amongst themselves for control. Marco, she explained, her voice tight with suppressed fear. They see violence as the only way to prove themselves worthy of the crown. My father is too weak to control them now. This summit, it's a trap, but also a desperate play. They need to show strength, but they're vulnerable. More vulnerable than your father knows. This hidden vulnerability, the internal strife within the Moretti organization, provided Marco with a crucial leverage point, a new understanding of the enemy's true motivations beyond simple aggression. It transformed the conflict from a simple turf war into a complex power struggle, offering a strategic opening. It was a moment of profound empathy for Marco, allowing him to see the Morettis not just as faceless enemies, but as a family grappling with its own internal chaos. This strategic insight gave Marco a new angle for negotiation, not just a ceasefire, but a path to stability during a succession crisis that would benefit both sides, preventing an even bloodier civil war within the Moretti ranks. Acting on this newfound intelligence, Isabella, convinced of Marco's sincerity and sensing a fleeting, almost impossible opportunity, secretly arranged a negotiation meeting, not with Don Carlo, who was too ill and too bound by tradition, but with Vinny the Blade Costanza, the ambitious, volatile Moretti lieutenant who was jostling for power. Vinny was a man of brute force, but also a shrewd opportunist. The meeting was set for a neutral, but highly symbolic, Location: an abandoned, heavily guarded warehouse on the Red Hook docks in Brooklyn. This particular stretch of waterfront had long been a source of bitter contention between the two families, its control shifting hands multiple times over decades of violent clashes, each brick steeped in the history of their rivalry and bloodshed. This was the symbolic arena, a hostile, intimidating environment designed to test Marco's resolve and his unconventional approach to its absolute limits. The meeting was set for a specific, impossibly tight deadline, just hours before Don Vincenzo planned his decisive, all-out retaliation against the Morettis, a massive coordinated strike designed to cripple their operations permanently. The stakes couldn't be higher. Marco, knowing with absolute certainty that his father would never approve and would, in fact, view it as the ultimate act of treason, made an agonizing decision. He penned a short, coded message, leaving it tucked beneath a specific porcelain figurine on his mother's dresser, a prearranged signal for something deeply important. It was a simple note, assuring her of his intent, that he was trying to save the family, the whole family, and asking for her quiet understanding, knowing she, more than anyone, yearned for peace. He then walked out into the cold, unforgiving night, leaving behind the safety of his apartment. He arrived at the desolate warehouse alone, unarmed, his only protection, his quiet conviction. The massive metal doors creaked open, revealing a cavernous, dimly lit space. The air inside was cold, metallic, filled with the scent of stagnant water and dust. He stepped into the grim interior, facing a room full of at least a dozen heavily armed Moretti enforcers, their faces grim, their eyes narrowed in suspicion and open hostility. Their weapons were openly displayed, a silent, chilling warning. At the center of the room, seated on an overturned wooden crate, was Vinny the Blade Costanza. Vinny was a hulking man, his reputation for swift, merciless violence preceding him. His face was a hard mask, his eyes like chips of flint. He looked Marco up and down, a sneer playing on his lips, openly mocking Marco's unarmed presence and unassuming demeanor. Marco had no backup, no physical protection, no leverage save for his wits and the fragile information Isabella had given him. His only weapons were his words, his empathy, and his desperate, burning plea for peace. This was the ultimate test, a solitary confrontation where his life, the fate of both families, and the very future of the city's underworld hung precariously in the balance. He was the gentle lamb thrown into a den of wolves, armed only with a song of peace, hoping it would be heard above the growls of war. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to turn back, but the faces of Tony in the hospital, and the innocent lives he knew would be lost, propelled him forward into the hostile silence. The abandoned warehouse on the Red Hook docks in Brooklyn loomed like a spectral titan under the glowering New York sky. The air inside was thick with the scent of stagnant water, dust, and the metallic tang of unspoken tension, a chilling premonition of violence. Marco, having slipped past Silvio's frantic, escalating patrols, stepped alone into its cavernous interior. The massive metal doors, which creaked shut behind him with an ominous clang, sealed him into an arena of his own choosing, a symbolic arena steeped in decades of bloody rivalry. He faced Vinny the Blade Costanza, a hulking man whose reputation for swift, merciless violence preceded him like a dark cloud. Vinny sat on an overturned wooden crate, his posture radiating aggressive confidence, flanked by at least a dozen heavily armed Moretti enforcers. Their faces were grim masks of suspicion and open hostility, their weapons openly displayed, a silent, chilling warning that resonated in the cold, damp air. Vinny's eyes, like chips of flint, raked over Marco's unarmed presence and unassuming demeanor, a sneer twisting his lips. A peace offering, Vinny scoffed, his voice a low, gravelly growl that echoed in the vast space. Or a lamb for slaughter. Rossi, Marco, outwardly calm despite the icy grip of fear around his heart, began to speak. He didn't raise his voice, didn't resort to bluster, or threaten in any way. Instead, he addressed Vinny directly, appealing not to his brute force, but to his intelligence, his ambition, and his long-term interests. He spoke of the crippling financial cost of the protracted war, the draining of resources from both families, the constant, suffocating threat of increased law enforcement intervention. He painted a vivid picture of a city under siege, businesses failing, and the legitimate fronts of both organizations suffering under the weight of fear and instability. His voice, steady and soothing, was a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere. "This isn't about who has the bigger guns, Vinny," Marco began, his words clear and precise, cutting through the tension. "It's about who has the longer vision. This war, it's bleeding us both dry. Every dollar spent on retaliation is a dollar not invested in something real, something that lasts. Every man lost is a son, a brother, a father gone, not just for us, but for you too." He then revealed his crucial, delicate knowledge. Don Moretti's grave illness and the volatile succession crisis brewing within the Moretti ranks. He spoke not as an enemy with classified information, but as a pragmatic observer, acknowledging the instability it created for their organization. "Your father is a proud man, Vinny," Marco continued, his voice resonating with an almost surprising empathy. "He built an empire, but this internal struggle, it weakens you, it makes you vulnerable, and it makes you predictable. Your men are fighting each other for scraps, while the real prize slips away." He then laid out his comprehensive peace plan. It wasn't merely a ceasefire, but a meticulous proposal for genuine, long-term stability, a clear, equitable division of disputed territories that offered mutual benefit, a meticulously detailed non-aggression pact, and even a groundbreaking proposition for joint ventures in legitimate businesses, real estate development, shipping logistics, even a chain of upscale Italian delis. He demonstrated how these ventures could transform both families from struggling criminal enterprises into legitimate, powerful economic forces, ensuring prosperity without bloodshed. He used examples, statistical projections, carefully chosen words, his voice a steady, soothing balm in the charged atmosphere. He maintained unwavering eye contact with Vinny, his sincerity undeniable, his conviction radiating outward like a silent force. He spoke to Vinny's ambition, his desire for legitimate power, his yearning for a legacy beyond mere violence. The tension in the warehouse stretched taut, almost unbearable. Vinny Costanza, a man accustomed to blunt force and guttural threats, was visibly agitated. He paced back and forth, his heavy boots echoing on the concrete floor, his hand hovering over the Glock holstered at his hip. He shot nervous glances at his enforcers, who watched Marco with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. One of Vinny's men, a burly enforcer named Sal, impatient with Marco's soft words, made a sudden, aggressive move, stepping forward, his hand dropping to the butt of his weapon, a silent threat to end the negotiation, to end Marco. Just as the tension reached an unbearable ninth moment, just as it seemed Vinny would finally erupt and dismiss Marco with a violent outburst. Or worse, just as Sal's silent threat would become a brutal reality. Marco, sensing Vinny's internal struggle for control, his deep-seated fear of an unstable future, and his unspoken yearning for leadership beyond mere violence, uttered a single, powerful, empathic statement that cut through the silence like a laser. His voice was low, but carried an undeniable weight. "You want stability, Vinny, not more blood on your hands. You want to lead, not just fight. You want respect, not just fear, and I offer you a path to that. A path where both our families can truly prosper, without tearing each other apart. A path to a future where you can build, not just destroy." This raw, intuitive understanding of Vinny's unspoken ambition, his vulnerability, and his desire for something more than endless war momentarily disarmed him. Vinny froze, his hand dropping from his weapon. For an agonizing second, the silence in the warehouse was absolute, broken only by the distant murmur of the city and the pounding of Marco's heart. Vinny's eyes, which had been hard and cold, now locked onto Marco's, a flicker of something akin to awe, even grudging respect, replacing the hostility. The fate of two families, perhaps the entire city's underworld, hung in that excruciating second. Then, slowly, Vinny Costanza lowered his hand from his weapon. He looked at Marco with a newfound, almost bewildered, respect. His hard face softened, almost imperceptibly. He took a deep breath, and then, slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand. "Marco Rossi," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with genuine surprise, a hint of grudging admiration. "You got guts, kid, or you're just plain crazy, but you make a hell of a point." He accepted the terms, a firm handshake solidifying the fragile peace. "I'll take this to the dawn," Vinny stated, "and I'll back it." The tension in the room immediately lessened, a collective sigh of relief emanating from the armed men who had been braced for a massacre. Marco had secured a fragile, but undeniably real, peace. He made his exit swiftly, slipping out of the warehouse just as Silvio and his men, having finally tracked his movements through Marco's subtle network of suppliers and contacts, arrived, their faces grim, ready for a violent confrontation they had narrowly missed. Back at the temporary Rossi headquarters, the nondescript warehouse in the Bronx, Don Vincenzo was pacing like a caged lion, his face a thundercloud of rage as he finalized his plans for a devastating, preemptive strike against the Morettis. The maps were spread out, the targets marked, the men ready to move. Suddenly, the news broke, not through his own channels, but through a chaotic flurry of incoming calls and frantic reports. The Morettis had abruptly called off their planned retaliation. A prominent journalist, subtly tipped off by Isabella Moretti herself, leaked news of a secret peace initiative brokered by a young, unnamed mediator, working against the wishes of the established powers. Vincenzo, at first incredulous, then furious, learned of Marco's direct involvement. He saw the irrefutable evidence unfolding before him. The Morettis were pulling back, their retaliatory movements halting, and a public statement from their inner circle signaling their willingness to consider an unprecedented peace proposal. Vincenzo's initial fury slowly morphed into stunned disbelief, then a profound, unsettling realization. His son's softness, his unconventional approach, had achieved what his own brute force, his decades of intimidation, could not. He had averted an all-out war that would have bled them dry, perhaps even led to their ultimate destruction. The silence in the war room was deafening as the magnitude of Marco's accomplishment settled over them. The Morettis, their sworn enemies, were actually willing to talk peace, and it was his son, the one he had ridiculed, who had brokered it. The public reaction was immense and immediate. The news of a potential peace between the two warring crime families sent shockwaves through the city. The media, once focused on the escalating violence, now scrambled to report on the unlikely peace broker and the unprecedented de-escalation. The legitimate business community breathed a collective sigh of relief, their stock prices subtly ticking upwards at the prospect of stability. Don Vincenzo, humbled and profoundly moved by a mix of grudging respect and a sudden, overwhelming sense of relief, publicly acknowledged Marco's actions in a way he had never before acknowledged anyone. In a rare, intensely emotional family meeting convened in the makeshift war room, now filled with a strange, hopeful quiet, Vincenzo, surrounded by his stunned capos and a visibly chastened Silvio, proclaimed Marco's piece a stroke of undeniable genius. His voice, though still gruff, was tinged with genuine awe. He looked directly at Marco. His eyes, usually cold and unyielding, now softened with a dawning understanding. "I was wrong, Marco," Vincenzo said, his voice barely above a whisper, an admission he had never made in his life. "I thought a Rossi needed only a fist and a gun. You showed me a mind is a stronger weapon. A wise heart is stronger than 1,000 bullets. You saved us. All of us. You saved this family. Marco." He then did something no one had ever seen him do. He slowly, deliberately placed his gnarled hand on Marco's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect, acceptance, and unburdened pride he had never offered before. Marco, who had only ever known mockery, dismissal, and scorn from his family, stood utterly vindicated before his father, his brothers, and the entire underworld. His path, once seen as weakness, now proven to be the true path to salvation, not just for the Rossi family, but for the entire network of businesses and lives intertwined with their destiny. He had walked through fire and emerged with peace, a testament to the unexpected power of gentleness in a brutal world. The seismic shift that Marco Rossi had orchestrated sent ripples of change far beyond the initial shockwaves of the peace treaty. The formal ratification, a meticulously orchestrated high-stakes meeting between Don Vincenzo Rossi and Don Carlo Moretti, took place in a neutral, heavily secured private suite at a downtown Manhattan hotel. Despite Don Carlo's frail health, he was lucid enough to recognize the strategic brilliance and the sheer survival imperative of the peace Marco had brokered. The agreement wasn't a truce. It was a revolution. It outlined clear, agreed-upon territorial boundaries for their legitimate business interests, establishing new, robust non-aggression clauses that carried severe penalties for any transgression, and, most crucially, forged a groundbreaking new era of joint ventures in real estate development across the city and shipping logistics along the East Coast. This radical transformation shifted the family's dynamics from violent, zero-sum rivalry to pragmatic, mutually beneficial partnership. Il Leone d'Oro, once merely a luxurious facade and a symbol of old-world power, now thrived as the undisputed centerpiece of the Rossi family's legitimate operations, becoming a culinary landmark and a subtle, unspoken testament to the new era of cooperation. The family business, redefined by Marco's vision, flourished, no longer reliant on the brutal, precarious world of illegal activities, but on diversified ethical investments that promised long-term stability and prosperity. Don Vincenzo Rossi, a man whose entire life had been defined by an unwavering adherence to tradition and the iron rule of force, underwent a profound, subtle transformation in the wake of Marco's triumph. The initial shock of Marco's success had given way to a deep, quiet respect. He began, almost imperceptibly at first, to cede more and more control of the legitimate operations to Marco, trusting his youngest son's superior diplomatic acumen, strategic foresight, and uncanny ability to forge alliances where he, Vincenzo, had only ever seen enemies. In a rare, deeply personal conversation, late one evening after a particularly successful quarterly business review, as they sat in the now-restored gleaming kitchen of Il Leone d'Oro, sharing a quiet meal, Vincenzo finally articulated his profound error in judgment. "I thought a Rossi needed a fist. Marco," Vincenzo admitted, his voice rough with emotion, a vulnerability Marco had never witnessed. The flickering gas flames from the stovetop cast dancing shadows across his aged, unyielding face, making him seem both ancient and utterly human. "I thought strength was measured by the fear you instilled, by the men you broke. But you showed me a mind is a stronger weapon. You showed me that a quiet word, a clear head, and a wise heart are stronger than 1,000 bullets. You saved us, son. All of us. You saved this family from destroying itself." He reached across the polished marble counter and grasped Marco's forearm, a gesture of profound respect, acceptance, and unburdened pride that had never before been offered. This was the antagonist Type B realizing their error, a moment of sincere humility and a fundamental shift in perspective that reshaped the very core of their relationship. Vincenzo, though still the patriarch, now looked upon his son not as a disappointment, but as his true successor, a leader for a new era. Silvio Rossi, chastened by Marco's undeniable success and their father's newfound, profound respect for his younger brother, also underwent a grudging, yet significant, transformation. The initial sting of jealousy had faded, replaced by a reluctant admiration and a dawning understanding of Marco's unique power. He still possessed his innate aggression, but under Marco's quiet guidance, he began to channel that formidable energy into protecting the legitimate ventures. He became Marco's fiercely loyal, albeit still intimidating, head of security for their sprawling real estate holdings and shipping operations. He was a formidable presence in boardrooms, ensuring deals were honored and rivals understood the new, formidable, but legal power of the Rossi name. He remained imposing, but his methods were now strictly legal, a living example of Marco's transformative influence on the entire family's operational ethos. The old guard, too, slowly adapted, seeing the undeniable prosperity Marco's peace had brought. Marco's reputation as a negotiator, a mediator, and a visionary for peace spread far beyond the confines of the underworld. He became a sought-after figure, discreetly approached by legitimate business magnates seeking to resolve complex corporate disputes without litigation, and even by local community leaders grappling with escalating tensions between rival youth gangs. He had found his true calling, not as a mob boss, but as a modern-day consigliere of peace and prosperity, a quiet architect of harmonious resolution. This was the meaningful opportunity for Marco, allowing him to fully utilize his unique talent for empathy, strategic thinking, and negotiation in a positive, constructive way, benefiting not just his family, but the broader community. He and Isabella Moretti, their initial clandestine alliance blossoming into a deep, trusting partnership, continued their collaboration. Their shared history allowed them a unique understanding, and they discreetly advised on other community conflicts. Building bridges where once only walls of animosity stood, they became the quiet, unseen arbiters of a new kind of urban diplomacy. One cool, crisp evening, several months after the formal peace signing, Marco sat alone at a quiet, secluded table in Il Leone d'Oro, long after the last diners had left and the bustling sounds of the kitchen had died down. The restaurant, once a volatile stage for his father's old-world power plays and the constant reminder of his own perceived inadequacy, now hummed with the quiet memory of joyful family dinners, successful business deals, and the comforting scent of prosperity. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the gentle clinking of a cleaner, tidying distant silverware. He looked out at the softly lit street, the gentle glow of the city filtering through the red velvet drapes. The palpable fear of sudden violence, of retribution lurking in every shadow, had lifted. He felt a profound, quiet sense of peace. He had not only saved his family from self-destruction, but he had done it not by becoming what they expected, not by embracing their brutality, but by resolutely embracing who he truly was, a man of quiet strength, of profound gentleness. He had found his place, not at the head of a criminal enterprise, but at the heart of a transforming one, leading it towards a future built on cooperation rather than conflict. This quiet, reflective moment reflected the new calm in his life, a hard-won peace earned through immense courage, unwavering empathy, and an unbreakable belief in an alternative path. The quiet son, once mocked, had truly become the family's golden lion, not by roaring, but by gently, yet firmly, leading them to salvation. 7 years later, the once desperate gamble had blossomed into an unprecedented triumph. The volatile New York underworld, once plagued by an endless cycle of blood feuds, now hummed with a different kind of energy, the quiet, purposeful hum of burgeoning legitimate businesses. Il Leone d'Oro, the venerable Rossi family restaurant, stood not just as a culinary institution, but as the vibrant heart of a flourishing hospitality group. It had expanded across the city, now boasting several successful sister restaurants, high-end catering services, and a chain of gourmet Italian delis that had captivated the palates of New Yorkers. The Rossi and Moretti families, once sworn enemies who defined their existence through violence, were now formidable, respected business partners. Their real estate ventures had transformed neglected city blocks into thriving commercial and residential hubs, and their shipping logistics company efficiently moved goods across the East Coast. Their former criminal activities had all but ceased, replaced by a powerful, albeit still discreet, legitimate empire built on mutually beneficial alliances and shrewd ethical investments. Marco Rossi, no longer merely the gentle son, had transcended his origins to become a highly respected figure in New York's legitimate business and philanthropic circles. His name, once whispered in contempt, was now spoken with admiration and awe. While he maintained close ties with his family, his primary focus had shifted to broader impact. He had co-founded a groundbreaking nonprofit organization with Isabella Moretti, aptly named the Olive Branch Initiative. Dedicated to youth conflict resolution in inner-city neighborhoods, the initiative aimed to break the cycle of violence that had ensnared so many. Marco and Isabella, leveraging their unique, first-hand understanding of conflict and resolution, taught young people the transformative power of negotiation, empathy, and strategic thinking over brute force. Marco often shared fragments of his own story, carefully edited to remove the illicit details, focusing instead on the universal struggle to find strength in unconventional ways. He spoke not as a former mob heir, but as a man who had discovered that true power lay in the ability to build, not destroy. His quiet, compelling narratives resonated deeply with at-risk youth, offering a tangible path away from the streets. This was his profound act of paying it forward, using his unique talents and his past, hard-won experiences to guide others towards peaceful, prosperous solutions, ensuring that no other family would endure the pain his had. Beyond the Olive Branch Initiative, Marco was frequently sought out by law enforcement agencies and community leaders. He discreetly advised them on de-escalation strategies in volatile situations, his insights into human behavior and conflict resolution proving invaluable where traditional methods often failed. He understood the unspoken codes, the underlying grievances, and the subtle cues that could either ignite a powder keg or diffuse it. His office, a minimalist space overlooking a bustling Manhattan street, now housed a growing collection of framed awards and commendations, quiet testaments to his profound impact. Don Vincenzo Rossi, now well into his 70s, had fully retired from all active business, both legitimate and otherwise. He remained the patriarch, a revered elder statesman of the family, but his days of commanding and conquering were over. He lived a peaceful, dignified life in his sprawling Brooklyn brownstone, spending his afternoons tending to his meticulously kept rose garden. He watched Marco's burgeoning success with immense, quiet pride, a profound acceptance of his son's unconventional power. He would often receive Marco in his study, listening intently as his son described new ventures, new partnerships, new philanthropic efforts. There was a quiet contentment in Vincenzo's eyes, the deep-seated worry that had once plagued him replaced by the serene knowledge that his son had not only secured the family's future, but had elevated its name far beyond the violent shadows of their past. Silvio Rossi, once the aggressive heir apparent, had matured into a formidable, yet entirely legitimate, corporate executive. He served as Marco's fiercely loyal right-hand man, overseeing the vast real estate and logistics operations. He channeled his inherent aggression into protecting the family's assets and reputation in the cutthroat world of legitimate business, driving hard bargains, and ensuring every deal was watertight. He remained an imposing figure, his presence commanding respect in any boardroom, but his methods were now strictly legal, his loyalty to Marco unwavering. He was a living, breathing example of Marco's transformative influence, a testament to the fact that even the most ingrained tendencies could be rechanneled for positive outcomes. The old guard of the Rossi family, those who had once scoffed at Marco, now deferred to him, their skepticism replaced by deep admiration and gratitude for the prosperity and peace he had brought. The story culminates on a bustling Friday night at Il Leone d'Oro. The restaurant, transformed by Marco's vision, was a symphony of laughter, joyous conversation, and the clinking of glasses. The rich aroma of garlic and fresh basil wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the subtle perfume of expensive colognes and delicate perfumes. Marco, no longer an outcast or a quiet observer in the shadows, moved gracefully through the packed dining room, a picture of calm confidence. He greeted customers, many of whom were city officials, renowned chefs, or prominent philanthropists, with a warm, genuine smile. He personally ensured every detail was perfect, from the lighting to the wine service, his gentle hands still capable of precision, now applied to the artistry of hospitality. He paused for a moment near a large window, observing a young family at a nearby table. A father, his face alight with pure joy, held his laughing child in his arms, the child's small hand reaching out to touch a flickering candle on the table. The scene was one of pure, unadulterated happiness, a stark contrast to the violence and fear that had once defined Marco's world. Marco caught his reflection in the polished pane of glass, a man of quiet strength, his eyes holding a deep, knowing peace, a subtle, contented smile playing on his lips. The iconic image of the golden lion, the family emblem that adorned the restaurant's ornate facade, once a symbol of brute force and terrifying dominance, now gleamed softly in the night. Transformed by Marco's leadership, it had become a beacon of quiet power, enduring legacy, and the unexpected, profound triumph of gentleness. The gentle lion, indeed, had not only saved his family but had shown the world a new way to roar, not with violence, but with the quiet, unwavering strength of compassion and intellect. The whispers of the past had faded, replaced by the harmonious hum of a future built on peace. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.